As entrepreneurs, there's a reason why we decided to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to tell the stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. On today's podcast, I'm speaking with Mike Jesowshek. So, Mike, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. I love having accountants on the podcast, which sounds kind of odd, but when I learned about how an accountant can help a business, you guys are absolutely mission critical to entrepreneurs. It's a topic that we don't want to think about, but you guys just really can help us out in so many different ways to minimize tax burdens and various things. There's so much cool things. So I'm really excited to have you on today. Really excited to have you here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for having me. And excited to kind of dig into it.
Awesome. So we've had a few other accountants on the podcast itself, and I always love to give people the opportunity. What's your ninja skill? Like, what are you good at? What kind of sets you apart in your little niche of the CPA world?
Yeah, the biggest thing is it was a couple years ago or 10, 12 years ago. It seems like a couple, but it's been more than that now. But I was never into kind of the tax world, and eventually kind of backed into learning about taxes, forced into it by not only myself, but was sick of working with or having my clients hit roadblocks where they ask their accountant, how do I do this? Or how do I take advantage of this strategy? And the accountant would say, well, it depends. And I need to know this, or this. And then I would talk to the business owner like, yeah, it seemed like a lot of work. So I just kind of dished that strategy to the side. And what I kept seeing that pattern, and I found out that, so many business owners are missing out on the opportunities that the government's giving them. I always say the government makes tax strategies or the opportunity to save on taxes. It's an incentive that the government gives business owners. The government wants people to be business owners. And so in order to encourage people to become business owners, they give incentives. And the one thing that the government doesn't do, though, is if you don't take advantage of the incentive, they don't knock on your door and be like, oh, by the way, you should hire your kids, or you should take the home office deduction. They don't do that. So it's kind of the entrepreneur business owner's duty to be able to find out what are those strategies. And so that really became a passion of mine when I seen so many business owners hitting a roadblock and walking the other way. And so what I always say is kind of the superpower, or really what my passion is now, is to say, let's take this concept, this hard, kind of robust topic of a tax strategy that might be hard to understand or confusing, or no real kind of straight-laced information about it. Let's break it down in an easy to understand way and get that in front of business owners. And, I always say when we look at a tax strategy, even if we look at a strategy of hiring your kids as an example, 90% of that strategy does not depend. It does not depend on what business owner, nothing about that. 90% of that strategy is the same for everybody. So if we look at the concept of hiring your kids, the tax savings potential of it, the documents that you need to have on file to back it up, prove it, and support it in the event of an audit, all that's the same for everybody. But there is that 10% that does depend. And, that's, I always kind of say, imagine that I'm a electrician and you are a lawyer, how we hire our kids is going to look a little bit different. Or if I have a 5-year-old or 8-year-old and you have a 15-year-old, how we hire our kids is going to be a little bit different. And that's that 10%. But that's an easy piece to tweak based on each business owner's specific situation. And so really my passion is to say, okay, I understand now that it depends is true, but it's not the beginning. It comes at the end in the actual implementation of the strategy. And so my passion is to say, how can I get business owners through that 90%? So instead of hitting a roadblock and saying, I want to hire my kids. Well, it depends. Okay, I'm going to walk the other way then. Instead of hitting that roadblock, I want to provide them with the tools to say, here's how you do it. Here's what you need to know. And here's some of the things you need to have as backup proof. Now just go and customize that strategy for yourself. And so that's really kind of been my roadmap and my passion to becoming, focused on this tax planning area.
And I love that because, as entrepreneurs, the last thing, just personally, no offense intended, but the last thing I want to think about is bookkeeping. It's like the accounting and tax planning. I want somebody else who's an expert to handle it because it's not the shiny object. It's not my zone of genius. It's not what I'm good at. It's boring as hell. To some people. But, I think that's where if somebody gave me the answer of, well, it depends, I'd be like, well, no, I don't want to deal with this. I'm not going to look at it. What I want as a business owner is somebody to be able to say, here's like 2 or 3 bullet points, just enough information to give me, and then let's explore some more. And I think that's something that, you speak entrepreneur when you do that, because you understand, we have limited attention span, but let me get you most of the way there. Let me just kind of understand it. So I love the fact that you do that. I think it really shows that you to understand the clientele that you're working with, and that we like shiny objects. We like short, sweet, give me the results and that's it. So I do appreciate that, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the tax code, it is complex and there's a lot of kind of misconfusing things. And you read something, you see something on TikTok, you hear one thing, then you go to your accountant and they're telling you something different. And so, trying to level that playing field and say, okay, let's get to what is the meat on the bone and what is important for the business owner to know in easy to understand language. That's really kind of been what we have been putting together in the work that we do.
Yeah. And I found that, just some of the stuff that I've had to do, like I had to hire a Canadian subcontractor, which is this weird thing. My CPA helped me navigate that and said, okay, here's what you need to do. Bam, 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 bam. This, it falls under NAFTA. Here's, and here's how you don't have to withhold 30%, which is what you have to do when you'd have a foreign worker, for taxes, help me to navigate that in a way that was really, really succinct and just kind of, here's what you need. And I really appreciate that in a tax professional. I really do. Awesome. So how did you get into this world? Like, how did you get into the CPA world and your specific little niche specifically?
Yeah, it's funny. So I was been an entrepreneur since the age of 14 and started out in the online marketing industry. And so was in kind of a unique affiliate marketing type industry at that young age. And, kind of grew up in that industry, sold my first business at the age of 18. And it wasn't anything crazy. I think I sold it for $7,000 or something like that. But it was really exciting to me at the time, but stuck in that online marketing industry and started to go to college and, was still doing this full time on the side and said, I've always heard, okay, I like the finance side of the business, but I wasn't even, working on that side. I was online marketing. But said, if this thing all falls apart, and I think that this is kind of an accountant mindset, is you always kind of plan for the worst and hope it never happens. But I said, if this thing ever falls apart, what's a good backup plan for me that can support me and, give me a good career? And so I went to school to be an accountant and graduated, got my CPA right away. Again, still in the online marketing industry, but the company that I was in at the time, there was 7 of us that were partners, and we were all really good at different things. We had a really good social media guy, a really good someone with media buying, all these different things. But because of that, we were trying to pull one company into 7 different directions. And so at that time, we said, it probably makes most sense for us to go out on our own, start our own businesses, and focus on what we do best. And at that point in time, I was running the finance side of this industry, and it was kind of a unique part of online marketing industry, whereas a lot of younger generation, everybody was working remotely, very kind of a modern type industry. And so back in 2013, I broke out on my own and started a digital accounting firm. And, now when you say digital or cloud-based accounting firm, it doesn't seem that foreign, especially after COVID. But back in 2013, this really was not a thing. But the industry that I initially targeted was this modern, everyone worked from home, virtual type industry. So it really gave me that opportunity to jump into that. So again, started that firm back in 2013. Didn't do tax, kind of fell into tax here where I was trying to solve problems for not only myself, but my clients, and then really fell in love with this idea of tax planning. And so was growing the firm and started a podcast by accident. So I wasn't a podcast guy. I didn't listen to podcasts, but I had a team member that loved podcasts. He said, Mike, you're doing stuff on YouTube. Why don't you try doing a podcast or, starting a podcast? I'm like, well, I don't really know anything about podcasts or seems very complicated. So what I did is I just took 3 videos we had on YouTube and put them up on a podcast channel and just didn't do anything. And like 6 months later, I was getting kind of random messages saying, hey, I love what you're doing. I'd love to learn more. You heard your podcast. Would love to learn more about working with you. And I'm like, what podcast are they talking about? And then it clicked to me like, oh, those 3 episodes that we threw on a podcast, earlier this year, people are starting to click on it. And so that was kind of the moment where I'm like, we need to do more of this. And so really started on a passion of saying, on our podcast, how can we focus on a tax strategy, one tax strategy a week, and break it down in simple to easy understand ways that get people 90% of the way there, to again erase that need of it depends. No, it depends, but here's 90% of the way there, and you can do the rest on your own. And really kind of fell in love with that podcasting area. Eventually, about 3 years ago, sold the majority stake in my accounting firm so that I could focus more so on this teaching and training at a higher level through the podcast, and then eventually developed a software last year that focuses on tax planning for small business owners. So all that to say is, I was an online marketer. Accounting was my backup plan, and here I am, practicing and doing CPA tax planning type work.
Exactly. So I want to rewind for a second. You said you started your first business at 14. What I always love to think about this. For me, my parents didn't know what to do with the entrepreneurial kid in their family. There's just it was like talking two different languages. And so were your parents supportive of this, or was this something like, well, we're just gonna let Mike go out and do what he wants? Or what was that process like? Both for you and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I would say not. They weren't supportive, but they weren't not supportive either. So
got it.
they just didn't really realize or know what I was doing because this whole working in the online space at that age, it was just over and above them. And so, but what I constantly heard was, when are you going to actually like get a real job, or when are you going to go work for,
Yeah.
get a real job? And it's to this day, my parents say like, I don't know what the heck you were doing up there on your computer and working on these things, but it seems to have worked out really well for you based on where you're at now. So, again, it wasn't that they weren't entrepreneur, or my parents aren't entrepreneurs, but they didn't not support me. It's just they didn't really
Mhm.
know what I was doing, and so they were just wanting to make sure that things were. I had a backup plan or a way to go, and that's probably what led me down the road of having a backup plan of becoming a CPA. Is just this urge or touch from my parents to say, hey, like, just make sure you got a good head on your shoulder and you're doing the right thing here.
Yeah, and I want people to hear those stories because I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, a lot of people, I've only heard of a couple people in the network that I have that have had parents who really understood entrepreneurship and could be able to support, whereas the rest of our parents are like, you scare the hell out of me. No idea what you're doing. Do you get a real job? They don't understand what it is.
Hmm.
It's a completely different way of thinking, like literally totally different brain path. And so that's why I figured I wanted to hear a little bit about that, to hear what that story was. Just to, maybe it might resonate with somebody later who's like, wow, that doesn't make that, what my parents were saying didn't make sense to me. I knew there was another way to do it. And I just
Yeah.
didn't have anyone out there to be able to say, do this. I tried to start a company at 16. And I think the trend I'm seeing is a lot of entrepreneurs did this. We tried to start like teens or so.
Hmm.
I didn't have anyone around. I had parents who didn't know, and I had a lot of people around who weren't, who didn't know how to take all of that visionary in my mind, break it down into something practical, and kind of guide me in the right direction. So for me, it was an issue. So I figured hearing that story would be helpful for you, or helpful for others too. So awesome. But so you went on. Did you just pick digital marketing? Is this just something that was like, hey, I think I want to do this?
Yeah,
How did it
no,
go?
it's funny. So, my dad, when I was a young age, was into eBay. And
Okay.
so he'd buy toys that were on crazy sales, or going on a clearance, buy like hundreds of the same toy and then sell them on eBay. And this was back when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. And so I kind of knew about this eBay thing and how that works. But what eventually happened is I was found somewhere, I don't know how it happened, but found something where people were selling ebooks on eBay.
Mm.
And so it would be like, I created my own book, How to Make a Cornhole Game. And, it was an ebook that sell for $1.99 or whatever it was, but it would teach people how to create their own cornhole game out of wood and everything else. And through the connections of that like little community that was out there, I ended up getting introduced to this idea of online marketing. And this was an affiliate marketing area. So basically, you send somebody to a company, they give you, a price per sale or price per lead or whatever it might be. And so the easiest example back then that we did is Netflix was just kind of growing up back then. And so one of the things that we would do is everybody that we'd send that would sign up for a Netflix subscription, Netflix would send us $45. And so, as an example, what we would do is we would create a reward program that say, hey, if you can get 5 people to sign up for Netflix, we'll give you a PlayStation or whatever it might be. And so basically we're getting paid $45 for everyone that they get to sign up. And then we're going to take 30 of it and give it back to them in the form of a gift of some sort, whether it's a PlayStation or something like that. And so that was kind of the industry that, from selling ebooks, went to that kind of industry. And then eventually from there grew up to now we're doing, major ad spends on networks and different things like that. But that was kind of the inwards of just kind of falling into it from the small, like, kind of little ebook type community that was selling on eBay.
Hmm. Interesting. Huh. Again, that's kind of one of the things I like to ask about is how you got into these specific things, and what
Yeah.
were the series of events that happened to that. So that's kind of cool, interesting. It sounds really similar to what Russell Brunson did with potato guns. We really, it kind of sounds in that direction. It worked out very well for him,
Hmm.
you as well. So awesome. So now transition that to accounting. Was it really because your parents were like, you need a real job, or just You loved accounting and that's how you got into it? I just want to.
Yeah, so when I was growing, when I started my first business in high school, obviously I needed to have some type of record keeping to be able to produce tax returns I was going to. And so I bought QuickBooks and really kind of just enjoyed doing that, like reconciling. It was more for, it wasn't a large business, so it was more so just like a checkbook, like, okay, check goes out, here's the money coming in. But I was doing like that own accounting of it on my own. And so really just kind of liked doing that. And that's what every business that I was in after that, I, was doing the online marketing stuff, but also, was helping out on the finance side. Depending on where the business is, what stage they were at, I would help on that finance side. And so I think that was that little bit of tweak that said like, oh yeah, this is kind of the direction that I want to go. And when I've graduated college or I've graduated high school, my parents pressuring me to get a real job. I didn't work for a bank as just a bank teller for a few year and a half, 2 years. And so just getting some experience on that, working with the money and, reconciling and all those types of things, I think kind of got that bug to go towards accounting. But, I always say, I think the most pressure to go into accounting was just the fact that it was probably the highest paid job from out of college, straight out of college. Was accountants probably were at that time the highest paid job, and so that was probably really the main motivation for me going down that route.
Exactly. And more power to you. If you like to do reconciliation and all of the accounting, more power to you. I will leave that in your lane. You're very capable lane.
Well, yeah, it's funny because that was the bookkeeping and accounting side was really my passion. And again, backed into this tax side. I hated taxes. I didn't want to do anything with taxes, tax filings, anything like that. But saw a need that my clients at the time weren't getting filled by the accountants that we were referring them to. And again, great accountants, they just didn't focus on tax planning. They were great at preparing and filing tax returns, but they weren't that great at helping people save on taxes. And so that I saw just a void there, and that's where I wanted to expand and be able to kind of fill that void. And that's what's kind of led me now to where all I focus on is tax planning. I don't do the bookkeeping piece anymore. It's all on the tax planning side.
Interesting. And so for me, that is to have somebody say, I really have a passion to doing this is something that I would seek out just personally, because I want somebody who nerds out to what I'm doing. I nerd out to keynotes, you nerd out to, e-charts and fun stuff like that, and journal entries and fun things that we don't really want to do. I appreciate that a lot. So that's awesome, man. So I want to go to your podcast because you said you were an accidental podcast host. And we were talking before the podcast episode today that so was I. And so I'm kind of curious, what, how were you an accidental podcast host? Like, what was the series of events that led up to that and had that happen?
Yeah, so like I said, I never was into podcasts. Didn't listen to podcasts. Didn't go on them or anything like that. But had a team member that really loved podcasts, and he was more in the sports podcasting, not the business podcasting, but really loved podcasts. And he's like, "Mike, you should get a podcast." I said, "Well, I don't know anything about it, so no." He's like, "Well, here it's really easy. Set up an account here, and I think it was Anchor or something like that. Set up an account here. You already have YouTube videos that you've done. So let's take the audio from those and throw them up there." So we put 3 podcast episodes up and then just never did anything with it.
Mhm.
And then 6 months later, was getting kind of random emails getting sent through saying, "Hey, I've heard your podcast," or, "I listened to your podcast here and would love to know, like, are you guys taking clients? How can I work with you?" And again, got kind of thrown through the loop, like, I don't know what podcasts they're talking about. And then it kind of came back that, oh, we did this, we put that podcast up there. And for me, it just was proven that here's a potential marketing opportunity for my accounting firm at that time. And so I said, well, it's working. So I've always been a kind of idea when it comes to marketing is let's throw everything at the wall. And if it sticks, keep throwing it. If it doesn't, move on forward. And this was something that we threw at the wall and it stuck. And so now, we've been consistently doing episodes ever since we've realized it stuck, but we didn't know it stuck until we started to get people, coming through the door from it.
That's really cool. So I always love the accidental podcasts because often they turn out to be really the coolest ones, and especially if you're doing something you love doing, like getting onto YouTube and just going like, dude, I really, I'm really passionate about this. Those are the best podcasts. I love that, man. Awesome. So as we're kind of getting towards the end of things here, I do have one question that I ask every person, and that is, what is one book or podcast that you can recommend to the audience that has had a major impact on you that you can kind of gift back to them?
Yeah, a book that I read is, and this was in the early years of college, was called The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco. It was just something that kind of really inspired the entrepreneur mindset in my mind. There's not a ton of substance in the book, but
Mhm.
just kind of inspired the idea of being an entrepreneur. And so have constantly every few years pick it back up, read it again, and actually had the author on our podcast a couple years ago, and that
Awesome.
was pretty cool for full circle, seeing that.
Awesome. I think it's one of there's two types of books that I'll read. And the first one are the ones that are just education dense. Like I'm in the middle of the Russell Brunson, it's like the third Russell Brunson book right now. I think it's Traffic Secrets. And those I read because it's just edification for me, trying to get better at my crafts, trying to get better at what I do. But then there's the other ones that, like you said, are kind of a light read where it's more, I'm
Mhm.
just looking to change my mindset. I'm not looking necessarily to get really deep into something, but I tend to find those books give me more add more to my life than the ones that are really content heavy. It's this
Mhm.
weird thing. I don't know if you found the same thing, but it's just that I get more out of them because now it's a new mindset change that now springs me forward to something else that then kind of keeps going and has this effect to it. I don't know if you find that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was something that I think it hit me at the right time. I was talking to MJ on our podcast, the author, and he said, I was really kind of blunt in that book, and he goes, I have a different way of writing and a different mindset of things now that I'm grown and older. But he goes, it's my most successful book I've ever had. So apparently it's working. But he goes, the way I approached and talked about concepts, I felt like I was being a little severe as I go back and now read it. But it hit me at a time at a younger age, just kind of getting into that entrepreneur world, that it really was an eye opener for me.
Awesome. Well, before we go, I do want to ask, can you share with something with entrepreneurs, some tax strategy or something that you see a lot of entrepreneurs overlooking that really can help them save on their taxes? Like, what's the one main thing, if you could just tell all your clients, if I only give you one piece of advice, here's what I want you to remember. What's
Yeah.
one thing you could share with them?
It's kind of a core concept that majority of the strategies that I talk with small business owners about stem from. So it's not a strategy in and of itself, but it's the concept that leads to so many different strategies around it. And it's this concept of turning after-tax spending into pre-tax spending. So, as a business owner, we have our business revenue or sales, and then all these expenses that get taken out of it, and then you land up at your profit. And whatever your profit is, that's what you pay taxes on. The problem that we see so many business owners is they go and support. They have a home that they're paying for, they're using after tax dollars to pay for that home. They have kids that they're putting through basketball camps, they're using after tax dollars for that. They have an automobile and they're using after tax dollars for that. And so the concept or idea that we talk to business owners about is that when we talk about this idea of maximizing deductions, how do we maximize the deductions in your business? We're not talking about go out at the end of the year and buy a truck that you don't need, because that's what every accountant tells you. Or go out and buy equipment that you don't really need, but you get a tax deduction for it. And that's the opposite of what I want to tell business owners. Instead, I want to say, how do we look at the spending that you're already doing, and how can we turn it from after-tax spending into pre-tax spending? How do we find a business purpose for that spending that you're already doing and turn it from after-tax dollars into pre-tax spending? And so the concept, great concept or easy way to understand this is, hiring your kids in your business can be a very good tax strategy, not just a tax strategy, but also just an overall good family strategy, teaching kids this concept in your business and everything else. But it can be a great tax strategy as well. And, I say every business owner, if you have kids, you're supporting them. You're sending them to basketball camps. They're going to amusement parks. They're doing whatever they're doing. But instead of using after-tax dollars, is there something that they could be doing in your business? And can we find something to do in their business to make it make sense and do it the right way? And now we get a business deduction for the money that we're paying our child to work for us. They potentially pay no income taxes on that. And now they go and pay for their basketball camp or whatever, however you want to work that. But it's, again, that constant removing spending from after-tax spending into pre-tax spending. So that kind of leads down the road of, the home office deduction and everything else that we talk about with business owners on. That's the starting foundation concept that we like to work on.
I have never heard anyone put it that succinctly, and it just makes a lot of sense. So I really appreciate it, Mike. Thank you so much for being on the podcast as well. I really appreciate you being here.
Andrew, thanks for having me.
Anytime. Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Mike, check out the links in the description.